Welcome into the PFF NFL Daily. Today, talking wide receivers, Sam. We're going to tell you where you can find them, both in free agency and the draft, maybe even via trade or potential releases. You wrote an article over at PFF.com kind of breaking it down, right? As we did this already with the cornerbacks the other day, we're going to do it with the receivers. If you are a team that needs receivers, you're stacking up free agency, the draft, and then other potential players. So overall, Sam, what are we looking at as far as the wide receiver market?
Yeah, I don't think it's the strongest group in the world in free agency. It's always tough, right? Because Davante Adams right now is scheduled to be a free agent, and he would be one of, if not the best free agent to hit the open market in years if he actually made it as far as that. But I don't think there's any chance the Packers let him go. I think at the very minimum, Adams will be franchise tagged and then maybe dealt away depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers. But I don't think he's going to be a free agent. So then you're down to, Chris Godwin becomes your number one available wide receiver. Chris Godwin's a very good wide receiver, but it's not the Davante Adams caliber of guy. And then after that, you're getting pretty low on guys that have that true number one potential. Allen Robinson, I think, still has that, even though he's coming to free agency off the back of his first real down year in a long time. But if you really need that impact wide receiver, at that point, you probably are turning towards the draft rather than free agency or, the trade candidates like Davante Adams or, some of these other guys.
The other potential franchise candidate, I think Mike Williams with the Chargers could be, a guy that the Chargers just want to keep around for the 1 year as they shore up that position for Justin Herbert. You mentioned getting down to Allen Robinson. Then it gets to Odell Beckham on our list, who's got the ACL. And then you get into a whole bunch of number two-ish type of options. Michael Gallup and Juju Smith-Schuster, Christian Kirk, DJ Chark. So I think, I think depth is there to be had in free agency. But I think there are also some potential home runs once we talk about the draft. Let's get to the draft in a second, because you had a list of receivers potentially available in trades. I think the most obvious one is Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. Already rumors that he'd be out there. We've seen him produce. He's generally played with good quarterbacks, but we've seen him produce across multiple systems, multiple teams, a good vertical threat. But you also have Amari Cooper on this list. Dallas Cowboys. Do they want to upset the apple cart? Because they'd be losing him and Michael Gallup. You have Calvin Ridley on the list for the Falcons, obviously a guy that could be traded, and you just threw Davante Adams in there as well. But this list could be intriguing for those teams that really need a good receiver.
Yeah, and the Amari Cooper thing continues to gather steam and to be reported and talked about more and more as the days go by. It feels like that's contingent on Dallas keeping at least one of their free agent wide receivers. Michael Gallup is scheduled to be a free agent. I think they would probably need to keep him. Cedric Wilson is also scheduled to be a free agent. Maybe they let him go, but I can't really imagine them being willing to roll into next season having let all three of those guys go, right? I know they still have CeeDee Lamb, and maybe they tag Dalton Schultz at tight end and keep him, but you would be going from one of the most deep receiving groups in the NFL with that whole collection of guys all playing in the same offense to suddenly this becomes the CeeDee Lamb show with Dalton Schultz there as a secondary option and not much else at wide receiver. So I get why they're a little bit underwhelmed by Amari Cooper's overall production. I think maybe it's a little bit knee-jerk and something of an overreaction or maybe a mischaracterization of his play to just decide that he's not worth the money. But I think at the very minimum, you need to make sure you're keeping Micah Gallup if you are going as far as trading away Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I'm with you. If the Cowboys get rid of Cooper, they're losing their advantage. Their advantage was this ability to attack teams with multiple playmakers and make life easier for Dak Prescott. But let's get to the draft, man. There are potential home runs, as I said. Drake London, 6'5", with incredible agility, ball skills. He's moved up to number 1 on the PFF draft board. You have both of the Ohio State receivers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. You've got speed. You have separation ability there. Jamison Williams is the speed threat in this draft, faster than everybody, but he's got the ACL injury, which probably drops him at least a touch. Treylon Burks, number 5 on our list, a big monster out of Arkansas that we've talked about quite a bit here. I think at least all 5 of those guys in that first-round mix, and I think for teams that don't want to spend in free agency, there are players to be had here.
Yeah, it's a really interesting group, right? Because there's no Jamar Chase this year. There's no guy that's just like the consensus number 1. and not even consensus number one, but somebody that everybody is 100% certain is some kind of superstar. There were people last year that would have had some people had Jalen Waddle number one over Jamar Chase. Some people had Devontae Smith, but pretty much everybody agreed that Jamar Chase was a fantastic prospect and was going to be a very good wide receiver. There isn't the same degree of consensus with this group this year. And Drake London is a lot of people's number one now. He's, I think, moving up boards as much as that is a thing and not just a construct of the narrative around draft season. But even London is a weird type of receiver, right? He's 6'4", 6'5", but he's not big. You know, he doesn't have the size, the bulk, the weight to go along with that height. And, you know, people have been pointing out that the list of wide receivers that are 6'4", 6'5", and, you know, 210 or less pounds, it's a really small list of guys, that have even been that size. And the list of guys that have panned out at that size is obviously even smaller. There've been like one or two over the last 25 years. So he would be a weird type, an outlier of a receiver to be successful. And then a guy like Treylon Burks is another player that I think everybody is all over the map on, right? There are people that have him as their number one receiver in the draft and top 5, top 6 in the entire draft board. And then there are people that have him, you know, outside of the first round. So, and you can kind of see the argument for both, right? He's this physical freak that can do everything. On the other hand, he runs a fairly rudimentary route tree, like isn't nuanced with those kind of route running savvy things that you kind of need to be good at the NFL level.
Hoops fans, the latest offer from DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's too good to pass up. New customers can bet just $1 on any team and get $150 in free bets if they win. It's that simple. The Sportsbook isn't yet available in your state. You can still take a shot at a big payday. Everyone can play for huge cash prizes with DraftKings daily fantasy basketball contests, and DraftKings is giving all new customers a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes with their first deposit. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF. Bet just $1 on any NBA team and get $150 in free bets if they win. It's promo code PFF at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 or older. Minimum age and location requirements vary by jurisdiction. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for full list of requirements and state-specific responsible gaming resources. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Yeah, the thing about Burke, 6'3", 225. We'll see what the official measurements are next week at the Combine, but fast too. So, I mean, from a trait standpoint, you really see it. Fast. Yeah, and you mentioned like at Arkansas, the weird usage pattern. They're using them like a Jalen Waddle, right? Like just get the guy in space, and clearly that's not necessarily going to the guy that he'll be next year, at the NFL level, but he's still good in space and shifty. And him and Drake London, right? They're both guys who are big, and you always say don't rely on the contested catch guys. But that these guys can do a little bit more. They move really well, which does make them more intriguing and less scary than some of those other oversized receivers we've seen not have success in the past.
Yeah, I don't think either guy falls into that category of, you know, the only thing they can do is contested catches, and that's a concern at the next level. Drake London in particular, people are going to lead off with that contested catch stuff because his numbers in contested catches were insane, right? He had like 5+ in multiple single games, let alone over the course of the season. But he can definitely do more than that. And you watch his tape and you see a guy that is getting open, that is separating even when they know the ball is coming his way. I'm not always 100% sure how it's working, but it is. And that's the bottom line, right? Is that these guys are getting open and making plays.
Sky Moore's another guy that's getting a lot of publicity. He just made it into our top 32. Western Michigan receiver, really shifty, good route runner, just knows how to get open. We know that's the most important thing at the next level. And then a couple guys rounding out the top 10 on the PFF draft board for us. George Pickens out of Georgia, Justin Ross out of Clemson. They're 59th and 61st, respectively, on the overall draft board. But Pickens is a guy that's had a lot of success at Georgia, coming off an injury-plagued season, who just makes spectacular catches. And Ross, a lot of the same, right? Ross probably would have been higher if he had another year of Trevor Lawrence throwing him the ball. So some bigger receivers to take shots on. And as always, there's a plethora of types and options as far as receivers go, both in free agency and in the draft this year.
Yeah, and some guys I think that do have that legitimate number one superstar type of potential. So if you don't get, you know, if you're not able to snag Devontae Adams, essentially, if you miss out on that true number one, if that's where your hole is as an NFL team who needs that number one, and you don't get somebody as a veteran or a free agent the draft is still available. Like, you're going to find there are those players in the draft. You might need to move around potentially to make it happen, but at least there are those players available this year.
Yeah, so go check out the PFF free agent board. You'll see there's far more receivers than we even mentioned. Good year for depth. The draft, same thing. And as I always advise, if you need receivers, do it in volume. You could do it in the draft or in free agency this year. It's the PFF